Today I wanted to look back at Gotham Knights, a game I enjoyed but felt largely underwhelmed by when I played it, and discuss the 5 biggest mistakes I think it made. So first up, I have the story. Gotham Knights had a really interesting and ballsy premise, which was, what if Batman died? What if in the opening minutes of this game, Bruce Wayne met his end and the rest of the story was dedicated to Gotham City's reaction? How would his enemies evolve and try to take advantage of this new power vacuum? How would his allies step up to bat, pun intended, and try to carry out his legacy? It was such an interesting idea, and it felt like such a fresh spin on the lore after 4 straight Arkham games of the dynamic between Batman and Joker. To remove those 2 key characters and focus on these background characters and allow them to have some time in the spotlight was a great idea. Unfortunately, the execution of Gotham Knights' plot feels thin, predictable, and risk-free. Jacob Kane being the voice of the court was more predictable than Jason Todd being the Arkham Knight, and Talia al Ghul profusely promising that she wasn't the villain only to become the main villain was even more predictable than that. What also really makes this frustrating is that there were just a plethora of interesting avenues this story could have taken. There was so much cool setup, so many unique ingredients in this mix, and yet the payoff is so thin, like I said. In the comics, Dick Grayson has familial ties to the Court of Owls, but those are completely forgotten in this game. In this continuity, Commissioner Gordon is dead, and yet we never find out who killed him. We could have seen how characters like Selina Kyle, Damian Wayne, Thomas Elliot, and Harvey Dent reacted to the passing of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and yet those characters are completely uninvolved. The only real character development we get from our core characters is through these non-linear cutscenes, which are well written and well performed, and yet because they are so adjacent to the story and not integrated into it, they feel very disconnected. They feel almost completely separate from what's going on in the main plot because there's no influence that the plot has on them, neither do they have any influence on the plot. Additionally, many of us were excited to see how the Court of Owls would be utilized in a AAA game, and yet it came across as underwhelming. As soon as we started to unravel their secrets, they didn't feel very menacing at all. In fact, they seemed to have less power over Gotham than Carmine Falcone did in the new Batman movie. They just didn't feel nearly as menacing as they could have. At number 2, I have just a general lack of cohesion, and I feel that the best way for me to describe this one is to just give a few examples. One of the biggest things that was marketed for this game was the fact that you could play as multiple different characters, that the cutscenes would play out differently, that the combat encounters and boss fights and everything would play out differently depending on who you were playing as and how you were playing as them, and yet this game has no option to replay missions, nor does it have multiple save slots. So the only way to re-experience this game's story or even particular missions is to just start a new game and be okay losing all of your progress, all of your collectibles, and everything. Now, there is a New Game Plus, so technically you can experience this game twice before you'd have to do that. But still, for a game that really was encouraging multiple playthroughs, it feels like it contradicts that in its choices there. An example within the game is at one point of the story, Oswald Cobblepot works with the Court of Owls to kidnap whoever you are playing as. At this point of the story, I was playing as Robin, and then after that mission, I switched to Nightwing and went and confronted Penguin for this choice, but then when he spoke to Nightwing, he was acting like Nightwing was the one that he had tricked and kidnapped. The game didn't account for that character switch, and man, that broke the immersion for me. Another example of this was when I went to speak to Renee Montoya as Batgirl. At this point of the story, Renee Montoya knew that Barbara Gordon was Batgirl. And then I went and watched an exclusive cutscene that told some of Barbara Gordon's personal story. Except in this cutscene, Renee Montoya was also featured, and she very clearly did not know who Batgirl was. Once again, a very immersion-breaking moment. Now, I'm not saying there's an easy fix to this. I think that having 4 playable characters that you can switch between any time has a lot of challenges, but I really wish that a little bit more effort had been taken in differentiating some of these dialogue encounters depending on if you'd switched and who you'd switched to. It would have felt far more immersive and interesting if when I went and talked to Penguin about the kidnapping of Robin, he had acknowledged that it was Robin and was acting like, oh, yeah, Robin can't even fight his own battles. He had to have his big brother come and talk to me about it. Like, that would have felt more compelling than the game just flat out ignoring that I'd switched characters. Number 3, the gameplay loop of Gotham Knights feels too similar to Batman Arkham. One of the biggest things that defenders and fans of Gotham Knights state pretty frequently is that you can't compare Gotham Knights to Arkham. It's too different, the gameplay's different, the art direction's different, it's a rebooted continuity, you can't compare them, it's not trying to be an Arkham game. I would argue that it is. Yes, there is some truth to that. Gotham Knights is an action RPG. The combat plays differently, the stealth feels different, there's more customization options that allow you to mix up how your character plays to an extent, and yet what you're doing in the gameplay loop is essentially what you do in an Arkham game. You're exploring an open world Gotham City, you are following a main story, you're completing side missions, you're finding collectibles. It really plays a lot like an Arkham game, just with some different mechanics. And one side of this argument lately has been, well, it should have just been an Arkham game. You know, if you can't beat them, join them. It feels like it would have been a great follow-up to Arkham Knight. They could have expanded on the dual play system of that game. They could have expanded upon the free flow combat system of that game. And it could have really been a great follow-up to Arkham Knight. And I do agree with that, but I also think the opposite is true. This was a great opportunity to do something wildly different. And if you go back and read the interviews from Patrick Redding and Fleur Marty and some of those higher-ups who were working on this game, I think that was the intention. It does sound like this game was a very different beast in development than the game that launched. It sounds like they really wanted to emphasize detective work. You were going to have to go and really investigate the characters in Gotham. It sounded like it was supposed to be this sprawling city with many different quest lines and many different characters. And it sounded like originally it was supposed to really focus on that campaign promise that the opening trailer had, which was, how does Gotham react to the death of Batman, and how do his allies figure out what killed him and figure out how to follow up his crusade. And so the fact that it kind of got reworked seemingly into just more of an Arkham game, just with those action RPG mechanics, I think made it a little bit too ripe for comparison. When Gotham Knights was announced, I actually had just played Assassin's Creed Odyssey and was really excited in the potential for a much larger scope. I was so interested in seeing if they could just bring tons of quest lines and tons of villains and some really unique ideas to the gameplay that made it feel more open and just more lived in. And unfortunately, I would argue that it actually took a step back. I really think that this game could have implemented a choice system. It could have done just a number of things to really differentiate itself. It could have added the Nemesis system, but unfortunately, I think that the gameplay loop was just too similar to Arkham, and at that point, I would say either just, be a sequel to Arkham Knight, or differentiate yourself enough that you're not really going to get those comparisons because you are different enough to not really warrant them. At number 4, I have Undercooked side missions. There were villain case files which were excellent, but there were only 3 of them. There were contacts of basically silent quest givers around the city, but they just gave you the same repetitive tasks over and over. There was the premeditated crime system, once again just giving you the same missions over and over again. There was a most wanted system where named criminals could be found at high-level crimes. None of them were named Batman rogues. You'd never run into Killer Croc or Two-Face in the city, but you would run into, like, True Aim, or just these very generically named villains that aren't from Batman lore or mythology. And so it just really killed any interest I would have had in that system, and it felt like it was trying to add artificial depth where there was none. It's just so disappointing, because I look at something like the Middle-earth games and their Nemesis system, and there is so much potential there. Or just the fact that this is an action RPG, and there was potential that there could have been just tons of quest lines to uncover. There could have been something on every single street corner, but instead, the open world just feels very barren. For the first couple hours that you're exploring the open world, it does feel interesting and exciting, but once you realize that there's just no depth to it, it becomes quickly underwhelming. To be honest, I think the Nemesis system would have been perfect in this game. It's about the Bat family trying to emerge after the death of Batman. They're trying to carry on his legacy, and to see how they interacted with Gotham's underworld, and to play as if you're rooting through that underworld and actually making an impact on the dynamics of Gotham City's crime, it would have been really interesting. It would have created some really dynamic gameplay experiences, like maybe you start going after Black Mask or something, and you mess up an objective where you're trying to be stealthy, and so he sends Deadshot to take you out, and so then you just have this impromptu boss fight with Deadshot in the open world. Or maybe you take out Mr. Freeze, and that creates a power vacuum where now Firefly takes his spot in Gotham's underworld, and you have to go and interrogate thugs to learn his strengths and weaknesses in order to effectively take him out and find where he is on the map. Overall, the mechanics of the open world in Gotham Knights just feel really undercooked and leave a lot to be desired. Now, before I get to number 5, if you're enjoying the video and could leave a like, I'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe, and let me know in the comments below how you feel about Gotham Knights nearly 2 years later. But let's get back into it at number 5. Lack of post-launch content. The only real DLC that this game got was Heroic Assault. And Heroic Assault was fine. It was a 4-player co-op mode where you got to go up against some bosses. It was fine. It was a cool feature for the game. However, I really wish that there had been some more story or character-driven DLC. One thing that was pretty much unanimously praised in this game were the villain case files. Despite the mixed reviews, everyone pretty much agreed that the set pieces and takes on these villains were really unique and interesting, and there was just such a good opportunity to add to that in post-launch updates. There are so many characters that would have been interesting to see in this context. We could have seen how Two-Face reacted after the death of Jim Gordon and Bruce Wayne, the two men he tried to clean up Gotham with. Maybe he'd become the judge. We could have seen what would have happened with Hush, maybe after he's just changed his face to look like Bruce Wayne, and now Bruce Wayne's dead, so everyone knows he's fake. We could have seen this universe's take on Scarecrow, Poison Ivy, Bane, Firefly, Killer Moth, Prometheus. So many interesting characters that I would have really liked to have seen Warner Brothers Games Montreal's take on. They also could have added new playable characters to explore the city with, everyone from Terry McGinnis to Damian Wayne to Selena Kyle. Alternatively, they could have done more story-driven DLC, like they could have done a prequel DLC where you play as Bruce Wayne as Batman, or they could have done an exclusive mission for each character, like maybe you have a story DLC where you play as Nightwing and you have to fight Deathstroke. Or maybe you have a Batgirl DLC where you have to fight her psychotic brother, James Gordon Jr. Or maybe you get like a David and Goliath style DLC with Robin and Bane. Or maybe you could go take revenge on Joker as Jason Todd. There's so many interesting things that could have been done and added to this story that would have improved it. It also would have improved the pacing of the base game to have more villain case files or just adjacent stories to follow. I really think that this was the biggest missed opportunity because despite all these nitpicks that I have with the game, just adding more content after launch really would have fixed a lot of these issues and made it a game that I think could have rivaled other superhero games like Spider-Man and Arkham. Clearly, things like the villain case files were a strength, and they could have just increased that strength by adding more, and they could have done things like add additional crimes around the city that would have added variety to the premeditated crime system. So overall, I think just kind of pulling support from the game rather than looking at the feedback and looking at the things people liked and adding to that was a huge missed opportunity. So that's my list. Again, feel free to let me know in the comments below what you think. And again, please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean a lot, and we'll see you guys in the next one.